Hey guys, what's up? This is Dingo Crikey here with another commentary video. This time I'm going to be discussing a topic relating to Transformers 5. If you guys are interested in more commentary on the 5th Transformers film, Transformers 4 Age of Extinction, or general Transformers discussion topics, then please check out my playlist and channel where I also have a number of Transformers stop motion videos, some of which are previewed here. But for this video, I'm going to be discussing the Transformers 5 toy line and whether or not the figures should or will be complex or simple. Now, a lot of you guys might be wondering why I'm bringing up this topic right now, seeing as the release of anything to deal with the Transformers 5 figures is years away from even being revealed, and of course we aren't even halfway through the run of the Transformers Age of Extinction toy line. Still, I figured that this would be a good topic to bring up due to the fact that there's been a lot of debate about the Transformers 4 toys between people who like and people who dislike the toy line as a whole. And I'm sure that there are a lot of reasons for why people either like or dislike the Transformer 4 toys. A lot of the reasons that people make their opinions on may have to deal with the color schemes, the amount of certain characters being reproduced, or whether or not they like the Dinobots, though generally I'd think most people like them a lot. But one of the major reasons seems to have to deal with the overall simplicity of the toys as opposed to the complexity in some of the previous toy lines. So I know that for some people, and definitely for me, a major issue is whether or not the Transformers 5 toys will be simple or complex. For those of you who don't know exactly what I mean by this, I'm just going to lay out like a few examples and definitions of what I think are complex Transformer toys and what I think makes simple Transformer toys. With that in mind, let's get started. So overall, how would I define complex Transformer toys? I mean, there are a lot of reasons. The first and foremost one obviously has to deal with the complicated transformations with many steps. I mean, I think that's just a given and almost a self-defining feature of complex Transformer toys. Other things that they do, though, is usually strive for accuracy in both modes. Because they have a more complicated transformation, they're usually doing that to make sure both modes look pretty accurate to their show or movie counterpart. While on the other hand, a lot of simple Transformers just strive to basically have a simple and fun transformation, and one that's easy enough for younger Transformer fans to be able to get around. The complex ones, I believe, are a lot more focused on accuracy in both modes. Another thing would be that oftentimes in the more complex figures, the details are like separate pieces of plastic rather than just one big chunk of plastic with a few different paint apps or, maybe a few details bulging out of the figure. Now, for me, that's a really obvious one, but it might be a little bit hard to understand what I'm saying here, so I'll try to use examples from recent figures that, a lot of people are familiar with right now. Take Voyager-class Grimlock from Age of Extinction and Evasion Mode Optimus from the same line. And the best way that I know to describe this is by looking at both figures' chest. Anyone who owns Optimus Prime knows that in his transformation there's a lot of shifting of his torso, when you basically take it apart and put it back together in truck mode, not really like Legos, but you guys know what I mean. Whereas Grimlock, his chest piece is more just like one big solid piece of plastic that the most it does is flip up in his T-Rex mode. There's no actual movement of the parts, and you can see that in the details. There's more crevices and cracks in Optimus's details. They look a lot more defined, whereas Grimlock's just kind of look like painted on there and like some of the plastic bulges out. So I hope that's a good example of what I'm saying there. Another thing would be that in most cases, the complex Transformer figures are generally less clunky. And I don't think I really need to explain what I mean by that. So looking at simple Transformer figures, well, one of the big things is generally easy transformations. Another big feature would be that they generally are more blocky and clunky toys, and that they sacrifice a lot of accuracy for simplicity and less complication. This might not always be true if the design of the character in the show is incredibly simple, but I do think this is generally a rule of thumb. There are probably more features that could define simple or complex transformer figures, but those are the most that come to me at the moment. So I'll move on to examples of both classes of figures. Well, complex figures, what do we have as examples? If we're to look at lines in general, I would say overall the Revenge of the Fallen line is the best example of a complex Transformers toy line. If you're to look at a lot of figures from that line, they're just very, very complex figures in transformations and in overall builds. Other examples would be certain Beast Wars Transmetal 2 figures, and I guess certain Generation figures also fit into that category, and you could probably pick out some figures from other lines, but I think those are generally the best examples, unless I'm forgetting something. Figures who work as general examples of complex ones would be Energon Mirage, Classics Megatron to an extent, Revenge of the Fallen Skids, and possibly Transformers for Evasion Mode Optimus. I mean, even though he's an Age of Extinction figure, he is a lot more complex than most of them. So moving on to Transformer lines that are overall composed of simple figures. I think the Transformers Armada line is obviously a really, really good example of overall simple Transformers. Also, the Dark of the Moon line was a lot more simple in comparison to the Revenge of the Fallen line, and they had some really simplistic figures. Then you have the Autobots from the Transformers Energon line. Now, I'm only going to say the Autobots because the Transformers Energon toy line as a whole was almost like two separate toy lines because of the way the figures were built. The Autobots were made so that they could power link with other figures, whereas the Decepticons were more like traditional Transformers. And the way the Autobots were built was a lot more blocky and simplistic, so that's why I would put them in this category. And the Age of Extinction line is a pretty good example of simple figures, with the exception of a few like Evasion Mode Optimus Prime. So some general examples of simple figures are Armada Hotshot, Classic Starscream, and I'd probably say Age of Extinction Strafe is another example of a very, very simplistic figure. So what would I say were the best examples of complex figures and the best example of simple figures? Like I said, I own a lot of Transformers, but I don't own them all, so there's certain figures like Masterpiece ones that I'm not taking into account here. But out of a lot of the ones that I do know of, Revenge of the Fallen Mixmaster is a great example of a very, very complex and complicated Transformer figure, mainly in regards to his transformation, and Leader or Voyager Revenge of the Fallen Optimus Prime. Really good examples of simple Transformer figures. The best one I could think of would be Cybertron Backstop. I mean, you know, for those of you who owned that figure or were around when he was released, you know that is a very, very simplistic Transformer figure. One of the most simple of a mainline figure that I could think of. You know, other stuff that could fall in this category is a lot of the really kiddie stuff, such as one-step changers and fast action battlers, but you know, that's really being nitpicky because that isn't even mainline figures. Mainly looking at mainline figures, I'd go with Cybertron Backstop. So looking at the pros and cons of both types of figures, well, let's look at the complex figures first. Their pros are that they have much greater chances of accuracy in both modes, which I mentioned earlier, but I gotta note that that is a very, very significant pro of these types of figures. Also, they have greater chances of more articulation and less blockiness. They also look a lot less kiddie. You know, they look more cool, accurate, all that kind of stuff. Transformations, while they can be frustrating, can be fun to learn. If you go looking up stop motions or doing them, you know that these guys look pretty cool in stop motions, especially when they transform. And the details look more legitimate and less blocky and contrived, kind of like the example I gave with Evasion Mode Optimus and Voyager Grimlock. But there are, of course, cons to these complex figures. One of the big ones, one of the ones that gets the most complaint, is that the transformations and functions of the figures can be very, very frustrating at times. Also, they're more prone to breakage, especially of the small pieces. I think this is a big downside to the complex figures, as any of us who have owned them have probably had this happen on at least two figures in the past. As cool as they do look in stop motion, they're difficult to work with in stop motion in some cases. And for those who still play with their Transformers, you know they're difficult to play with, just due to their complicated transformations and, the breakage, all that kind of stuff. And, they break a lot in transformation too. I think that's a good thing to note. And another thing is that while the vehicle modes oftentimes are pretty accurate, they can also look puzzle-ish sometimes, and the robot mode may be difficult to, keep stable, if you know what I mean. When you look at the pros and cons of the simple Transformer figures, I think in a lot of ways they just contrast what's going on with the complex ones. The simple ones have the pros such as, easy and fun transformations. They usually stand easily. They're not hard to work with, that kind of stuff. They usually don't break as much, but, depending on how quality the figure is, you still might run into that. And a lot of times they can just be fun to play with. Like if I'm sitting around watching TV, I'll just pull a Transformer off the shelf, and a lot of times it's a simple one. It's just fun to transform, pose, do that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? As far as the cons, I do think one of the big ones is that they don't usually look good in both modes. Given a lot of times their vehicle modes still look pretty good, their robot modes in a lot of cases look really blocky and clunky, and they don't have all the functions that they would if they were a more intricate and complex figure. Also, they just don't look as cool, if you know what I mean. They look more like kiddie and kind of play schoolish. Now, they don't look as bad as GoBots in most cases or anything like that, but they just don't look as cool as a lot of the complex Transformer figures do. Now, you do have figures such as Revenge of the Fallen Megatron, Classics Bumblebee, or Classic Starscream, who are overall simple Transformer figures, but they still look good. But then you have a lot of the Armada figures, such as the original Hotshot figure, or someone like Scavenger, who just don't look very cool when they're posed on the shelf. A lot of that has to do with the idea that they can't really pose or anything, they just don't look all that great. And there probably are a few more things I could go over in those categories, but that's all I'm going to cover for now. Overall, if I had to give my opinion, I would say that I definitely do like the complex Transformer figures better than the simple ones overall. And you guys who have listened to my videos in the past know that I like the Transformers Age of Extinction line. I like a lot of the Classics figures. I even like a lot of the Energon Autobots. The Armada figures, they were okay. But, overall I do like the complex figures a lot better. In a lot of cases, I do enjoy the complex transformations. I mean, even if you do have some breakage going on and that kind of stuff, it's something that I can suffer with as long as the figure still looks good. And a lot of the complex figures in the past, such as Robots in Disguise figures and certain Beast Wars Transmetals 2 figures, they had a lot of kibble and extra stuff sticking off of their bodies. But I think that the Revenge of the Fallen line basically proved to us that Transformer figures can be incredibly complex and still look really, really, really nice in both modes, without a lot of kibble or add-ons and accessories and that kind of stuff. The Revenge of the Fallen line pretty much determined my opinion on the matter just because we got so many cool and accurate looking characters. Take a character like Starscream from the films into mind. I mean, the 2007 toy we got for him was okay, but you had those huge clunky arms that were nothing but guns. He didn't even have actual hands. He was really immobile. His legs were awkward. He really didn't suffice for what Starscream looked like in the movie. Whereas the Revenge of the Fallen figure, I mean, that thing was incredible. I'm speaking more in particularly of the Voyager because unfortunately I never got the Leader class figure, but that one looked really cool too. I think there are lots of other examples like Skids and Mudflap. As dumb of characters as they were in the movies, they had really cool figures. And guys like Sideways, I mean, he did suffer a little bit because his feet were so small, but if you're going to compare him to a similar figure like Barricade, in my opinion, there's no competition who the better figure is. Other than the fact that Barricade might have a cooler color scheme, but Sideways got some pretty cool repaints too, so I'd say that's kind of a draw in that area. So for me, I would definitely like to see the Transformer 5 figures take after the Revenge of the Fallen line and go back to a lot of those complex builds and complex transformations. I mean, we have designs such as Optimus Prime's second one and Transformers Age of Extinction that look really, really cool in the film. and the toy just doesn't cut it as the figure for that design. So I'm basically hoping that what happened with Optimus Prime's original design in the Revenge of the Fallen toy line will happen again. Basically, we had the 2007 toy of Optimus Prime, the leader class figure, that really wasn't that great. I mean, I own the figure, but I don't really like it. I've even considered selling it. It's just not that good of a toy to me. And then we get Revenge of the Fallen Optimus Prime, whereas both the leader and Voyager class are awesome looking figures. We have some other designs from the film too, such as Crosshairs, whereas I think he could have benefited from a more complex transformation. I like the figure, I know lots of people don't, but I do think it could have benefited from some more intricacy. Other figures include like Grimlock or even Slug, certain ones like that. You know, they're just a little too blocky for their designs. Despite what I want, I do think the Transformer 5 toys are going to be more like the simple, dumbed-down Transformer figures that we've gotten in the last few years, as opposed to the Revenge of the Fallen line. I do think there's a chance that they could go back to some more complexity, mainly because they're kind of separating the lines, like the Generations line from the Robots in Disguise line. You know, the Kitty stuff will be in one area, and maybe they'll amp up some of the Transformers 5 toys for some of the older fans. But, you know, I don't think they're going to do anything as crazy as the Revenge of the Fallen figures were. And I think that's unfortunate because I think it's a really good line. So if I just had to sum it up, I would say that complex figures are overall better. I do prefer them as well, but I don't think that's what we're going to see in the Transformers 5 toys. Like I said, it's so early on at this point, I could be totally wrong, and we could have Revenge of the Fallen toys all over again. Hopefully not a Revenge of the Fallen film all over again, just the toys. But those are my general predictions on the matter. So that about wraps it up for this one. If you guys have thoughts on this, you can leave it in the comment section below. What do you like, simple or complex Transformer toys? Maybe you like them both and kind of prefer them to do like a back and forth each movie. You know, one movie we get simple versions of the characters, the next movie complex versions, and, you know, just keep a trend of doing that. Maybe you're one of these people who won't buy Transformer toys if they're too simplistic, you know, just because you can't stand them. Or maybe the complex stuff just over your head and you don't really like it that much at all. You know, leave your thoughts in the comment section below, along with any topic suggestions that could pertain to Transformers 5, Transformers 4 Age of Extinction, or general Transformers discussion topics. Tell me if you have any ideas. And also, please remember to check out my previous Transformers commentary videos if you haven't already done so. I have around 35 of them, I believe, on my channel right now, so if you're interested in any of those topics, feel free to check them out, along with my Transformers stop-motion videos. More Transformer videos to come soon in the future. Stay tuned, and have a good one, guys.